Shabbat Shalom. This week, as we begin a new book of the Torah, we begin Dvarim. I want to offer some thoughts about how we measure ourselves against others. So in the Torah portion we read this morning, in the Haftorah, we're looking ahead towards Tisha B'Av, which we observe on Monday night. But our Torah portion actually also, in a way, is a precursor to Tisha B'Av because it describes the events that brought us to the very first Tisha B'Av of sadness. So Moses recounts the story first told in the book of Numbers. The Israelites are like, what kind of place is it that we're going to? We need to read. We're going to this land of Israel. We need to read the Yelp reviews. What kind of place is this that we are going? And so they send spies to check out the land. They bring back the giant fruit, and they bring back a negative report. And as Moses says, our brothers have taken the heart out of us, saying, we saw there a people stronger and taller than we, large cities with walls sky high, and even Bnei Ha'anak, even giants were there. And so the Israelites stay up all night crying and weeping about how this land of Israel is so terrible and they don't want any. And God says, like a parent in days of old, I'll give you a reason to cry. From now on, this night will be the night on which all of the most dreadful, this day that follows, will be the day on which all of the most dreadful events of your history will accumulate. And so on this particular day, the Israelites were punished that they would wander in the desert for 38 years. It was in some ways perhaps their first exile before they even entered the land. They had a pining for a land that they could not enter. The thing about this story is that when we read the Israelites kvetching, there are giants in the land, and who are we to go in? We might say that this is just hyperbole. We might say that slaves who are ungranted to them. However, in order to understand that story, and in order to perhaps defend the Israelites a little bit, I need to take you on a bit of a detour that stops at the Hellers, or at least a subset on a road trip, usually somehow ends and along many roadside attractions. So Ruby Falls, claimed baggage outlet, where all the luggage that your airline does not return to you goes, and then other people can buy it. Mammoth Cave, the world's largest office chair in Anniston, Alabama. These are the kinds of places where we like to journey. And what's great about all of these roadside attractions, all these stops, the one thing that unites them is the ability to purchase branded swag. So every time we return with a Buc-ee's hat or a Mammoth Falls keychain or something of that nature. It turns out that one of the biggest tourist traps in the ancient world is in what was then called Rabat Ammon, then Amman, Jordan, which is the world's largest bed. We did not visit because there is not a Buc-ee's on the way. But we are told in this week's Parsha that when the Israelites were on their way, on their journey, only Og, king of Bashan, was left of the remaining Rephaim. His bedstead, an iron bedstead, is now in Rabat Ammon. It is 9 cubits long and 4 cubits wide by the cubit of man. So if you're wondering how big this bed was, well, there's twin, there's full, there's queen, there's king, there's California king, and then there's Og. You cannot find a fitted sheet for an Og-sized bed because 9 cubits, the measure of a man, is about 13 and a half feet. So this Og, we are told, was one of the original giants that reigned before the flood. Og was, as his name might indicate, one of the OG giants. And so Og, when the Israelites were complaining and fetching, no, there are giants in the land, they were not entirely wrong because, well, there was one. The rabbis actually with giants. He was so big that when he lays around us. And so that big was Og really, and how big? The debate that comes up, his bed was 9 amot. Is a cubit, is this your elbow to the end of your finger. On a normal person, that's about 1 feet, about 18 to 20. For Og, the question was, were these regular persons or were these Og? And so you actually get into this. It wasn't just that Og 13.5-foot bed, that in fact, this was a bed that was big even for Og. So the question is, do we measure ourselves against everyone else, or do we measure ourselves against ourselves? Are we measured against the norm, or are we measured against the rest of the world? So Og, was he a giant or was he a giant? And so for the Israelites, there was this question of Moses was very clearly trying to get them to do something very specific. He was trying to get them to measure themselves against the generations that passed. You, the generation that grew up in the desert that are about to enter the land of Israel, realize that the generation that came before you were spiritually weak, were ungrateful, were not capable of understanding the blessings they had received, and were incapable of entering the land. They were not able to live up to God's expectations for them. You already have them beat, but my expectations for you are even higher. And the whole rest of the book of Deuteronomy is about what these people will need to do in order to merit, to attain, to retain, to settle, to really reap the benefit of the land which they are entering. When we think about how we are measured and how we measure ourselves, so over the last 8 months or so, I have taken up a process of exercising. And I have quickly realized that I really cannot measure myself against the Tour de France guys, or really anyone under 50, right? Right? The question is, can I beat my previous? I'd like all of us spiritual selves. When you think of yourself in prayer, comparing yourselves to the rabbis, I mean, no one can pray as fast, right? And like you're a disadvantage, not as fluent in Hebrew because you haven't grown up being familiar with the prayers. Well, you know what? You're not being measured against everyone else, right? The question is, am I maximizing what I'm able to do? Am I taking the abilities, the skills that I have to do the best that I can? When we think about giving tzedakah, right, we are not measured against someone for whom millions of dollars is couch cushion money. Although if there's anyone like that here, let's talk over Kiddush. Right? We are measured against ourselves, right? What is the percentage, what is the amount that we give relative to our capacity? It's not how much we give relative to the next guy, it's how much we give. What do we prioritize relative to what we can do? It's not just about, though, how we judge ourselves personally. We can think in the world how sometimes people are judged not based on themselves, but how are people judged based on the world around them, right? So famously, if you look in Israel, over 50% of all resolutions of the UN Human Rights Commission are about Israel. Israel is being judged on a curve that is so steep, you can't even see how tall it is, right? Apparently, Iran, Russia, Myanmar, Sudan, those places don't even rank. Israel is being judged by criteria that the rest of the world isn't even aware of. Here's a part of my sermon that I wasn't sure if I'm going to give, but what the heck, why not? We got time. There was a lot of fuss this week about who would be chosen as vice presidential candidate. To be clear, I am not endorsing or criticizing either party. Lines to chew off my ear about why your candidate is the favorite will be forming on my right and on my left. I have 2 ears. Pick your side. What I want to point out, though, is how do we measure? Because I heard a lot of people talking about the fact that a Jewish person might be chosen to be the vice president, which, by the way, happened once before. I don't know if any of you remember. It's about 24 years ago. And so there were some who were, because those people are anti-Semites. There were all kinds of conversations that went on, and there were fusses that happened. Oh, a Jew wasn't chosen. So on the one hand, I'd like to point out that no matter what happens in this election, right, there will be a Jewish person as an immediate, unless Kennedy wins, right, there will be definitely a Jewish person who is a member of the immediate family of the president, whether it's a daughter or a husband. I don't know what our ancestors 40 years ago would have thought of that prospect, right? The idea that a Jewish person would even be considered to be vice president would have been some sort of fevered dream, right? They asked my grandfather, do you think that someday wearing a kippah will be something that prevents someone from serving in high office in this country? My grandfather said, absolutely not, as long as that person is not actually Jewish. And so I would encourage us to ask the question, are we measuring against the fact that someone was considered but not chosen versus the fact that a Jewish person was not considered at all? Of Og against Og or against everyone else's bed? We have an interesting 3 months ahead. God bless us all. But what I want to point out is that as we measure ourselves at this moment, no matter how dire the situation is, and I do not want to understate how seriously concerned we must all be as we approach the Tisha B'Av, the existential concerns that we all must have for our neighbors, our cousins in Israel, and for us here, that this is a situation that almost every Jew in history would have given anything to witness or live in. The idea that we as Jews would have an army, the idea that someone would take seriously the idea that a Jewish person could be the second in charge of the largest and most powerful military force in the world, unheard of. And so in this moment of uncertainty, I would encourage us to take this concern, this anxiety, and also this pride, but perhaps redirect ourselves to think not about measuring ourselves against our measuring ourselves against us. So think about kosher means in. So if you're a vegetarian, you already have it easy, right? It's like writing your name on the SAT. You already get 400 points. Shabbat and holidays. If you're retired, right, 6 days shall you work, on the 7th shall you rest. I don't work any days. Think about how you treat others. So some of us have the kind of personality, well, you know, there is a prayer that someone once shared with me, you know, I think I've been pretty good today. I haven't spoke of ill of anyone. I haven't offered an unkind word. I haven't snapped. I haven't yelled. I haven't had an uncruel thought. But soon, Lord, I'm about to get out of bed. I'm going to ask your help with the rest of the day. So you may have the kind of personality where it comes naturally to be kind, to be caring, to give someone the benefit of the doubt. Or you may need that prayer that I just mentioned. How well can you do given the kind of personality that you brought into this day? And as you think about your process of prayer, as you think about your giving of tzedakah, as you think about all of the ways that you make a difference in the spiritual world and the world of our community, don't think about, well, gee, can I do as well as that guy over there? Think about, am I doing the best that I can do as me? I don't have to sleep in Og's bed, but I do have to sleep well in my own. Shabbat Shalom.